the Stop Destroying Games initiative, I can't use the proper name here because YouTube might demonetize my video, is trying to save games, but they might also be hurting them in the long run. Hello everyone, my name is Edrem, animatronic puppet VTuber and content enjoyer, and also hater of the whole SKG movement. Not exactly fully hating, right? I want it to be better. It hasn't gotten better. They're going into like the end game now, trying to get signatures. I want to get my thoughts out on my problems with this and how people aren't talking about it and how it can affect games, right? Get things from the other point of view. I know people have talked about now a lot of the drama with Pirate Software and those kinds of things. We'll say I mostly agree with Pirate Software, and I can see how he gets to the points that he's making, because SKG and the whole EU Citizens Initiative have been very badly handled, and it's very confusing what's actually being talked about, right? Like I've talked to people who have not seen Pirate's video, and they think that it affects only single player games, right? I've seen people who say like, oh, it doesn't affect mobile games, it doesn't affect like gacha games. It's like, no, they say on the FAQ they want it to, right? There's lots of misinformation, and whenever you try to discuss this, it's always like either, oh, we you know, that's up for the EU to decide, or oh, that's not what we actually mean. There's a lot of problems with this, and that it's kind of just very loosely defined. But in very, very simple terms, my biggest problem here is that SKG and the EU Citizens Initiative are two different things, right? They keep selling this as being like, well, don't you want to preserve games, right? You want games to still be active after they end support. That's the SKG side. Preserving games, that's the kind of their core statement, right? They know they can't preserve every game, but they want to preserve a lot of games. And they're doing that by arguing for consumer rights in the EU, right? That is, if you buy a product, you should have access to that product, and a company cannot take away access to that product without situations, right? Like unfair notice or things like that. If you pay for a product, you should always be able to have access to it reasonably. And these two things are not the same. There's overlap. There's a lot of overlap, but it's not. And what I'm saying here is a lot of these things in this area, unrelated to preserving games, can actually be kind of very confusing and very devastating to game development. I kind of want to go over them today, right? And I'm going to have this as an example. These are a bunch of games that have an example. I say one of the biggest problems that I've had with SKG is that they've given very few examples of games and how they could work in the future, right? They've given the example of The Crew, which I've put here. That's their big mainstay one, right? Of like The Crew. That's their poster child of the whole movement. And that is a mostly single player game that had online servers that were turned off. So it's like, okay, that's fair enough. That's a really easy case. But this is also why people argue that like the single player game thing, right? Because in the Crew's case, they're not asking for the servers to be restored. They're just mostly asking that people can still play the game afterwards, right? As in people can still play solo player. So that's kind of a thing there. But we've got Splatoon 3 here. And I've got Splatoon 3 because it's kind of a expansion on this. The Crew is pretty much a fine game single player, right? Like you pretty much play through the game, enjoy it quite a lot single player. Splatoon is a split game. I would say that 1/3 of the game is the single player mode, which is a very good single player mode. 1/3 of the game is the PvP mode, which is the main kind of selling point, right? For a lot of people, it's the PvP. And then the last third is the PvE mode, the salmon run, where you all work together to rack up and do the levels. Now, if they shut down the servers for this game, you would lose access to 2/3 of that. You'd still have the single player, but you wouldn't have access to any other things. Now, from the preserving games point of view, that might be fine, right? Like SKG might be fine in this situation of saying, yeah, that's good enough. But from a consumer rights point of view, if the main reason you bought the game was for the PvP, and then the PvP is no longer available, what's going to happen there, right? what's going to happen? Do Nintendo need to have some kind of way that you can continue to do PvP with others? Possibly. Possibly. And this is where we also get to another issue, and where I've seen a lot of confusion from SKG itself over this. If you buy a game, right, let's pretend the EU stuff is in law, right? If you buy a game, you should not be expected then to pay additional money after a time in order to continue playing that game. I think that's reasonable, unless it's a subscription-based game, right? You should not pay extra money after time. You should not be forced to go onto a subscription in order to continue playing the game. You can kind of agree that that's a point, right? So Splatoon 3 runs on Switch hardware. Should you have to buy a PC in order to run the server software to continue playing Splatoon? Now, in this thing that like SCG kind of just skips over, they're like, as long as the server software is released, we're okay with it, right? But that's not running on the Switch, and getting it to run the Switch would be an absolute pain in the ass at the same time as Splatoon 3, unless it's like just limited to local play only. So we've got a problem here of, is it okay to tell a consumer, hey, you can no longer play this, but you can buy an expensive PC and then continue playing it through that? It's like, this is one of the things where we don't really know. SK just kind of skips over it. It might be the situation. Additionally, many of these online services might require a subscription, right? Nintendo might be licensing some things from other vendors. So is it okay then to say, hey, you have access to the server, but in order for the server to work, you need a subscription? And I'll get to that in a later game down the list. So there's problems there where it's like, what actually happens here? What actually happens here? These two groups would disagree on what's okay here. And that causes the confusion. Because you say one thing and they say, oh, SKG is not about that. It's like, yeah, but the EU initiative would be about that. Now, we're coming to WoW in FF14. They've already kind of talked about how subscription-based games probably won't be included. And it's like, that's fair enough, because at least the consumer is informed about that, right? They're informed that, hey, you pay for this game, you pay on a monthly basis. If you stop paying, you lose access to the game. A consumer is informed of that, so it's fine, relatively, to shut these things down. I would argue, though, and this is the weird situation, for anyone that plays modern WoW, WoW's not really a subscription-based game anymore, is it? It's a token-based game, which is very, very strange. That basically means that as long as you keep playing WoW, earning gold in-game, you can then use that gold to buy a token which gives you more game time, right? You continue to play the game, and your reward is that you can play the game more, which is dystopian when I say it like that, but that's just the way the game works, right? So you don't actually need a subscription, so the rules there may not apply because you are not doing a purchase. As long as you keep playing, it's fine. As long, you know, you buy the game and then you also maybe you buy a little bit of a sub time, but you can kind of just go through it and not have to pay much at all to the game. It's confusing, and confusion is one of those areas where it's like, yeah, how the hell are we going to address this, right? Now, FF14 is a traditional subscription-based game. It's also reached end of life. And this is where things get a little bit confusing as well with end of support, because SKG seems to think that you only end support once. I should mention, right, they've mentioned the idea of like, oh, okay, grandfathering all the in the existing games. So none of these games would actually be affected. We're arguing this from like a point of view of what happened if the law was created like 20 years ago, right? That wouldn't actually even be old enough for WoW now, I think about it. Jeez. But we're using current games as an example of how things would have to change. Now, in FF14's case, yeah, the game has already sunset. The game has already reached end of life if you bought the game on PlayStation 3. And this is where we get into other problems with end of life support. Because from the preserving games point of view, again, it's kind of fine what FF14 is currently, right? The game is still there. It still exists. It's still playable. It is available for people. There's a lot of stuff in the older expansions that you can't get access to, but most of the game is there. But from a consumer rights point of view, you buy the game on PS3, you play the game on PS3, now you can no longer play the game on your PS3. And the developers ask you to move on and buy expensive new hardware in order to continue playing the game. There's a question there of, would that actually work? Would that be okay? And getting into even weirder details, would it be end-of-life support if, say, you play on a Windows 7 computer and the online game you play now drops support for Windows 7 and requires you to update to a newer version of Windows? This is the stuff we've got to hash out, right? Because that is a paid purchase for many people to upgrade. Although I think Microsoft was offering it free for a period of time. I don't know the specifics of that and whether or not that counts if the operating system is offering a free upgrade. But even then, you might have to buy new hardware for that new operating system. So there's a bunch of stuff here where it's like, games don't just end support once. They end support multiple times, or at least live service games. Single player games and small time multiplayer games, like, yeah, they can kind of be all right. But these problems get big, and they get even bigger now that we have things like crossplay, right? Where, yeah, the people who are playing on FF14 on PS3 were playing together with people on PC. They're in the same community. They're in the same servers. So how do you go about releasing server software there for them? And also, how do you go about doing that if you can't require the players to have new hardware, right? This is where it gets confusing. This is why I understand in Pirate Software's video where he talks about making games single player. Because if you add in all these additional constraints of like, hey, you need to make the game playable, but also you can't require the user to have a separate system in order to run the server software on it, then yeah, what you would have to do to these MMOs is make them single player. You wouldn't have to rebalance them. I think, to be honest, devs would just be lazy there and be like, screw it, you get god powers, you just smash through the game. We don't have to worry about actually making things work. But it is there, right? Now, Guild Wars 2. This one's kind of the most traditional of the situations, right? It is a game that you buy. You play the game. You buy the expansions if you need to. You don't have to pay a subscription. So Guild Wars 2 would most likely be up for this, right? Of, hey, they need to release their systems at the end of life. It's supported by a cash shop with like the gem system. But the most interesting thing about Guild Wars is that it is built mostly off Amazon hardware, Amazon Web Services. And this is where we get into the server stuff that I really, really don't like about Stop Killing Games, because they just seem to completely gloss over how servers work and how tech works and just pretend like these problems can be solved easily by just moving away from it. Right? That's why I really, really do not like this FAQ where it goes into all this. Which, by the way, not a lot of people have actually read the FAQ on this website, because I've seen so many people be like, oh, this doesn't apply to free-to-play games. Right? Well, it doesn't apply to these things. It's like, no, they want to do that. It's in here, right? Large-scale MMOs, they want to be able to run on consumer hardware. Just run it on your own computer. It needs to be designed to scale down to a person's computer. But, yeah. It's like, yeah, it includes free-to-play games as well, as long as the free-to-play games has microtransactions in it. But there's a whole bunch of things here about, yeah, license agreements. For example, many companies have agreements with server software programs and multiplayer software programs. And even indie games often use services for their multiplayer that they might not have the full rights to, as in they can't release that to consumers in the end. Or they have to ask consumers to pay additional subscription fees on it. Which, again, I don't think that falls under the consumer rights, right? If you're playing a game and all of a sudden one day the game company goes, okay, if you want to continue to get access to the game, you now need to pay a subscription to AWS. Don't think that's going to fly. right? I don't think that's going to quite work. From the preservation point, it's like, oh, that's relatively fine. It's relatively small fee. But consumer rights, I don't see that because it's a hidden fee on top of things. So we got that. Old school RuneScape, I've included in here just for completion. It's more just like, that is a free-to-play game. Yes, but it also has microtransactions in it in the form of subscription and bonds. So it would be included because I've seen people, again, think that games that are free to play, that are not a purchase at the beginning, should not be included in this. Although I do kind of argue that from a point of view, it's probably SKG wants it to be included, but I don't know if it would be included, seeing as you're not actually buying the game, you're just buying things in the game. It's a little bit harder to argue if it should release. And the last one, and this is kind of an interesting case, it's a growing area. Now you can hate this kind of game. I kind of don't really like it. I think the concept is interesting, but I hate the technology behind it. But this is a relatively small game called Suck Up. I'll take it here. Now, Suck Up is a game that is powered by generative AI. There's a lot of ethical problems there, but the basic of it is that you are a vampire who is bound by the more traditional vampire rules, right? You cannot enter a person's house unless they give you permission to do it. So the idea behind this game is you are going around to people's houses, knocking on their door, talking to them and trying to convince them to let you in. And the NPCs are powered by ChatGPT, and the game also has a speech-to-text system that is taking your voice and turning it into text for ChatGPT. Right, so you just actually have to speak things into the mic and it'll work. And it's like, this is all very, very online, and it's not really possible for them to just take it offline, right? They can end support for this game, but they can't just give you ChatGPT. They can't just do that. They don't have the rights to that. And when people talk about how, like, oh, you know, people find technology, they'll find ways around it. It's like, no, we're not going to have generative AI models just freely given to people at the end of life on these games, right? Now you can give really shitty models, right? Not the ones that Suck Up actually uses, but there's like local shittier versions of ChatGPT that you could potentially plug in. Whether or not that actually counts, I don't know, right? Because it's like you're replacing one part of your software with a really inferior version and then giving it to consumers. I don't know if that would count. And you still have to find that inferior version that you can very easily package up and just send to customers at end of life. So this is one of the things where it's like, we're going to get more games like this over time. We're going to see more games like this. And the whole SKG movement is not at all considering the ramifications of this, right? The server tech is moving to even more stuff online, whereas SKG wants everything to be offline, right? You can run things locally. Like, this is not going to work. This is the big clashing area. And this is where I also think that the EU initiative could fail because they're like, we don't want to stifle the innovation in this area, right? There's potentially a lot of money to be made in here. Of course, I think generative AI at the moment is currently very unethical in the way that it trains on stolen data, but that's a whole different thing. So there's stuff here where I can't see it working well for many of the games that are currently being developed. I also really don't like this whole appeal to, oh, games used to be this way, we can return them to being this way, right? There's so much stuff like, oh, old games, you could just run a local server. It's like, yeah, we've moved on from that. We've found newer things that we couldn't do in the past. We shouldn't return to the past. We used to have games that didn't require a graphics card to run, right? Should we require all games to still not require a graphics card to run? It's like, no, that would be ridiculous. would hamper the whole industry doing that. We can't just be like, oh, tech will find a way around it. No. There's hard issues here that we can't just be like, tech will find a way, right? So these are my kind of example games that I want to talk about and see what people want and see what people interpret as well themselves with how these games work. Like, how would you want this game to work? How do you think it's going to work? And the last point I'll get down to is how game companies are going to counter this, right? Because so much of this relies on a really simple thing, which is the idea that you own the game, right? So much of it relies on the fact that, like, you are buying a product, therefore you are owed a product. If you are buying a service, then you're not owed the service at the end of life of service. So I'll put together a quick list of basic ways that companies are going to counter this, right? And the first one, easiest one, is they're just going to say that you lease the game, right? Instead of purchase, it's a lease, or a buy license would be another one. Just change the wording, because the whole point here is if you're an informed customer, if you're informed that, hey, you are not buying a product, you are buying a license to this game and the license can be shut down in the future, it's probably going to be okay for the game company to shut it down. The other one is crappy offline mode. Now, with Splatoon 3 as an example, Splatoon has a really, really good offline mode. The single player story is great. But if we require games to just be playable, but not fully playable, right? Like we don't require all of the online features, then games could just attach some kind of crappy offline mode. They can attach something that's not all that great, but it still meets the technical minimum requirements for this. The other one is expiration date. Now, I know Ross from SKG has talked about the expiration dates, and how, like, that would kind of scare consumers off. I don't think you need a hard expiration date, like a, hey, this game will cease service on this date when you buy it. What you can just have is a soft expiration date, right? Like, let's say a game comes out today, you can have on there, hey, service is not guaranteed past 2028. That'd be kind of fine. You're informing the consumer that, yes, after 2028, you are not guaranteed to still be able to play this product. They're informed. So it's from the EU's point of view, it's like, okay, that's fine. You were informed of fully ahead of time that, hey, this is happening. And the game company doesn't have to stop service in 2028. They just can't stop service before 2028. You could even move it back, right? As years go on, you can increase the store listing that says, like, oh, now it's stopping service in 2029, you know, if it's a year later. Keep going on. And then when you actually want to stop the game, you don't update that listing anymore, right? Like, let's say, you know, game's 2 years off being sunset. You just don't update the listing now until you get to that point in time, and then you sunset the game. So that's one way I can see game companies definitely getting around this. I can see game companies, some at least, just not selling in the EU. I know this is like a big market to kind of leave out, but we've already seen this a little bit with some gacha games where they're just not available due to certain EU laws around gambling and things like drop rates and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, they don't want to sell to certain things. Now, I think this is probably a big ask of companies to be like, I'm not going to sell in the EU, but I can see some being like, this is not worth the effort, especially depending on what kind of rules the EU comes up with for this. Like, if they're too strict, then yeah. Games like Suck Up, I can see being like, well, we can't even sell in the EU because we can't release the server code, so we're not. The other one is that complying in the EU, but not elsewhere. Ross seems to think that, you know, you get game companies to comply in the EU, and then they'll spread that out to other countries, right? As in, if you're in America, when the game ends support as well, they'll let you download the server software. Don't think that's going to happen. He uses Valve as an example of this. Now, Valve got their ass kicked in the Australian court over not offering refunds, because in Australia, which I'm from, by the way, refunds are guaranteed by the government, right? It is a government system, not just a business system. So if we buy a defective product, we are legally owed a refund. And Valve tried to fight that and being like, we're not an Australian company, we just deal in Australia. And they got bodied by it, and they've got a refund system now. But the refund system for Australians is not the same system for everyone else, right? Everyone else gets like a 2-hour window of, hey, if you played this game for more than 2 hours, you can't get a refund anymore. Or all these other extra conditions. Me, an Australian, I'm like, yo, I've played this game for 8 hours. It's not great. It's crashed on me twice. Screw it. I'll just refund. And it goes through. Because they know Valve is like, yeah, the government's going to get on my ass about this if I potentially don't refund this guy's game purchase. So we don't have the same restrictions that other countries have. Which is also like going against what Ross says, because yes, Valve has a refund policy now, but it's not the same that came in because of the Australian government. We have a different system. It's marketed the same, right? Because Valve obviously don't want you to know that, hey, Australians can refund games well past the 2-hour mark. They don't want people to know that. But we can. It's a different system. So you're going to have game companies there that comply in the EU, but don't comply elsewhere, because there's no reason to do that. And to be fair, on them, it's extra work at the end of life, right? So there's that kind of thing. And the other one that I remembered now, and this is kind of a weird one, but when a game ends service and it sends out things to you, which version of the game should they send you? Now, I know SKG has argued that, it should probably be the most up-to-date game, because that's often the best version of it, right, with the most amount of features. Sometimes games remove features, but most likely the last version will be the best version, right? I'm going to say that game companies are going to argue this. They don't want to sell you, they don't want to give you the latest version of the game. They want to give you the version that was the current version at time of purchase. Now, I can see companies do this as like malicious compliance, right? But it's like, it's technically true. This is the version of the game you bought. This is the version that was available when you purchased it. You're not owed these extra versions they've made over time, unless you are playing a subscription-based game, right? And then it's kind of implicitly part of that. So I can see game companies being like, well, you bought this game, at the very start, you get version 1.0. Your friend you want to play online with, well, they bought it like 6 months later, so they get version 1.2. And we're not guaranteeing compatibility between them. So good luck, right? Now, I can see this being like really malicious, yes. But I can also totally see game companies doing it. So there's kind of my issues on this. The whole thing of this is that SKG is just basically really, really vague on everything. I know the EU initiative has to be vague, right? It has to be broad. But that's where I want SKG themselves to be like more detailed on things. I don't want to have to look up a 40-minute video on an FAQ that doesn't actually answer my question on what they mean about certain things, right? Especially when, remember, this is meant to be in the European Union where not everyone speaks English. And you've got a YouTube video being the main source of information for frequently asked questions on this. It's not great. It's not great at all. And then it still doesn't answer my questions. Like, I still don't know what they want with things that require a subscription. So, yeah. There's a lot of problems, and I've argued these things from the beginning, but I'm like, maybe SKG can improve. Maybe they're, still starting out. They can improve the language and improve how they market themselves over time, but they really haven't, right? This website, this FAQ, sorry for the flashbang, it has not updated at all since the first time I looked at it, right? Like since Thor made his video, there's been nothing added to this. Even though they've got a whole FAQ video, they've not turned any of this into text. There's a whole bunch of things that are still confusing people about the initiative. And there's a whole bunch of people who don't know what exactly it means, or arguing that it doesn't apply to free-to-play games, that it only applies to paid games, or arguing this and that. It's like, everything is confusing, and confusion makes people worried about what's going to happen. So there's my kind of thing. I want more clarification on this, especially because, if it does actually go through, and it has to be talked about with politicians, and someone has to actually go and try and make it into a law, who are they going to consult on this? right? Like if they actually go to SKG and be like, okay, how should these things work? We talk to industry experts and we also talk to consumers like you. It just seems like they're ill prepared to actually go through with this. So yeah. Anyway, that's my whole criticisms of SKG. I would hope that it improved over time, but it seems like we're reaching the end and it hasn't. So I can't support it. I can't support it because I see that it can damage games in many, many ways. And I know that it's like, yeah, it's add a bunch of things to it. It'll be very good for consumers, but I also see it being very, very messy for game devs. And SKG want to just like wash their hands of that and be like, in their FAQ, they say, won't asking for this harm developers. It's very unlikely. It's far more likely to benefit them. It's like, no, they can definitely harm some developers. And I hate that they're acting like this is entirely positive. It's like, no, there's very big negatives. But anyway, thank you all for listening. My name is Edrem, and